2 games in Atlanta shows just how frustrating this Cincinnati Reds team can be.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Reds. My name is Jeff Carr, and I am a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan. I'm glad that you're alongside me today. This is my 6th season hosting the Locked On Reds podcast, and I've been bringing you daily Reds content ever since the very end of 2018, New Year's Eve 2018. And I'm happy to be with you. I try to be positive as much as I possibly can about this Cincinnati Reds team. They're my favorite team, and they're your favorite team, I hope, as well. So we're going to talk all about what's the big thing on every Reds fan's mind every single day here on the Locked On Reds podcast. That's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And I'm glad that you're alongside me today because we got to unpack what these 2 games in Atlanta mean. Don't want to get ahead of ourselves. There's a couple of good things and, maybe some things to take it easy on a little bit. There were some great performances, headlined by Spencer Steer, especially on the second game of this weird weather messed with series. But there were also a couple of troubling performances, led by Frankie Montas, that we will talk about a little bit later on in this show. That's all coming up on today's Locked On Reds episode that is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, the right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book your next stay at Booking.com today. And where we will start today is with these 2 wins that the Cincinnati Reds had in Atlanta. Yes, I am aware that I used the word frustrating when I said, open today's show, talking about these 2 games. Because in the grand scheme of things, this is wildly frustrating. The Cincinnati Reds can play teams like the Atlanta Braves, who are a bit decimated by injuries. Not going to lie about that one. They didn't get the Braves at full strength, but the Braves are still a well-run organization. They're still a pretty good team. The Reds were able to play them very, very well. And they looked mostly good. There are a few things to kind of be a little bit troubled about. We'll talk about that later on in today's show. But for the most part, there was lots of hitting, good pitching from most of the guys that the Reds threw out there on a mound. And you're like, see, this is the potential of this team. The Atlanta Braves are a bona fide playoff contender. And the Reds played them like a bona fide playoff contender, fresh off of a series where they got swept by the Washington Nationals. The kind of series that absolutely deflates an entire fan base, and then they go out there and they do this. So does that mean everything is fixed? Let's pump the brakes on that for a minute, because let's set the stage. After these 2 wins, the Reds are 49-53 on the season, 4 games under 500. That puts them 10 games behind the Milwaukee Brewers. Feels like a range of games trailing that the Reds have been all season against the Brewers in the division. And they're only 1 game ahead of the Cubs for the bottom of the division. Then you look at the wild card and you get a little bit more enthused, but it feels like they've been 4 games back of a wild card spot for like the last 4 weeks or something, like maybe even longer than that, but they're 4 games back from a wild card spot. They're only 2 games ahead of the Nationals, though, in the wild card race. The Nationals being the last real bastion of wild card contention. They don't really even consider themselves contenders, but the fact that they swept the Reds may have given them a little bit of pause and thinking that they could go for it, but they're probably not going to go for it. But the point is, outside of the Rockies and the Marlins, who are nowhere near the playoff race, the Nationals are the next team that's kind of like the bottom of this group. So yes, there are plenty of ways to look at the Reds, especially these 2 wins, and say, yes, they're good. In fact, you can even do this. The Reds are 14-7 against the Braves, Guardians, Dodgers, Yankees, and Phillies. Would you be surprised if all 5 of those teams made the playoffs? Because I wouldn't. The Braves are built to be a playoff team. They have so much depth. It's being tested, but I think they'll be in the playoffs. The Guardians are one of the best teams in baseball. The Dodgers are one of the best teams in baseball. The Yankees have hit a skid here recently, but I think they'll be in the postseason. And the Phillies are one of the best teams in baseball. And the Reds are 14-7 against those 5 teams. That's fantastic. So you see that potential. You see kind of the top end of what the Reds could be. Elly de la Cruz is another example of what the top ends of the Reds could be. He is breaking out. He is becoming, and he's not there yet, but he is still taking that step to where we think he can be. 5 for 9 in these 2 games against the Braves. He had a homer, a triple, 5 runs scored, and 3 steals. In fact, for the entire month of July now, in 17 games, 67 total at-bats, Elly de la Cruz is batting .313, getting on base just over 40% of the time, and slugging .627. Those are MVP numbers. He is playing at a very, very high level, and he's done so for most of the season. And you see Hunter Greene in the first game of this series in Atlanta. Hunter Greene stepping up. He pitches well in Atlanta, and he did so again in the first game of the series. 7 shutout innings, beautifully pitched, pushed his season ERA all the way down to 3.14. If he has another really good start like that one, we could be talking about his ERA being in the 2s. That's how good a season Hunter Greene is having. Plus, he has 133 strikeouts, and we're not even to the month of August yet. And he has a whip, a walks plus hits per innings pitched. So basically a base runner average of 1.09 base runners per inning. That's it. That is really good for a starting pitcher. He's looked phenomenal. We've got guys taking the next step. We've got the Reds playing really good against really good teams. But, and as much as I hate to say it, as much as I hate to look at this team and go, but, there's definitely a but. And I know I said the word but a lot there, but still, the point is, as good as the Reds have been in situations, the Reds are also 17. Here's another record for you. The Reds are 17-27, 10 games under 500 against every other team in the National League wildcard race, not from Atlanta. The only National League team that is currently around them in the wild card race, the discombobulated wild card race for the National League. The only other team that is around them that the Reds actually have the tiebreaker against currently is the Chicago Cubs. Every other team around them holds the tiebreaker. The Reds, and this is distressing. The Reds are 38-51. 13 games under 500. If you take away their games against the White Sox, Marlins, and Rockies. The 3 worst teams, and there's a big gulf between those 3 teams and the next worst team. The 3 worst teams in baseball. And yes, every other team has to face those guys. Differing amounts. So it seems unfair to take that out, but I say that to say yes, they can show it against this tip-top competition. They can show it at times, but the consistency, the night in and night out performance of this team isn't there. And it gives me pause whenever they do really good for 2 games in Atlanta like this. I'm very happy that they beat the Braves. I'm very happy that they won when I was there. Great experience at Truist Park, and one of the biggest reasons why it was a great experience is because the Reds won. But I'm not going to go too crazy just yet, because it kind of feels like they're spinning their wheels. They're They're not getting any closer in the wild card, and they continue to do some things that worry you a little bit. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But we're just getting started on today's pod because there were a few other performances that impressed me in Atlanta, namely one Spencer Steer. This episode of Locked On Reds is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially travel to baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, we're talking about your rival cities with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more over at Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city. Or, like what happened just a couple of days ago for me. I got back from Atlanta, spent a nice couple of days there as the Reds faced the Braves. I know it rained and stuff, but I found the perfect stay on Booking.com. They made it so easy because they've got hotels that look over stadiums. They've got family-friendly resorts by the beach and so much more. Booking.com has the kind of choices that can make you a fan of any U.S. city this season, all throughout Major League Baseball season. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com. Use the website or on the Booking.com app. And all throughout the baseball season, you can use Prize Picks to enjoy the action even more. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app for so many different reasons. They've got easy to play games. They've got fast payouts. They've got big payouts too. In some cases, you can put together just 4 picks and win up to 100 times your money. We're talking about 4 picks. And you can turn $10 into $1,000. Just like that. And it all takes like 60 seconds because you just find your favorite players like Elly, Cruz or Hunter Greene. You find your favorite stats like stolen bases or strikeouts, and you click more or you click less. That's all it is. And you're playing against the computer. You're not playing against the thousands and billions and millions of other people, and you're not facing some kind of professional guy that's been doing this all of his life and all this other stuff. You're facing the computer. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code, all lowercase, Locked On MLB, for up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Again, code Locked On MLB, all lowercase, will get you an instant deposit boost of up to $100 on that first deposit. Pick more or pick less. It's really that easy. You've got to check out Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories in all of sports. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And speaking of every single day, shout out to our everydayers out there. Thanks for making us a part of your day every single day. On our next Locked On Reds show, I actually got a lot of thoughts, and usually we do like a Thursday thought. I'm going to make it a whole show, and that's actually going to be coming out later today because the challenge for Nick Krall is clear. And quite frankly, it started like this past offseason. This trade deadline is just a part of it. The clock is ticking, and we're going to talk a lot more about that later on today on the next Locked On Reds podcast. Make sure you join me. But let's look back. Okay, so these 2 games, there were a couple, actually, really good performances, things to be excited about. I know I just kind of put a little bit of cold water on 2 wins, but there are some guys to be really excited about, and we'll start with Spencer Steer because he took over on Wednesday. That first game of what was supposed to be a doubleheader, and it ended up not being a doubleheader, which, by the way, I think that was a huge blessing in disguise because the Reds did not get a lot of pitching out of Frankie Montas, so they still had to use the bullpen, and they were getting ready to use the bullpen even more in Game 2. And I know that they had the off day on Thursday, or today, but you use everybody in your pitching staff in one day. That's not a great thing. And so they avoid that. They also avoid having to face Chris Sale, who's having a pretty good bounce back season. But yeah, overall, I thought that was actually the best thing that could have happened, is that they win and then they don't have to use everybody out of their bullpen. But Spencer Steer, huge reason that the Reds won on Wednesday, because he was just smashing baseballs. He had that little league home run that was basically, it was scored a triple, but the throwing error from the second baseman for the Braves meant that he came around to score on what was an inside the park home run that was actually scored as a triple with a throwing error, and Steer scored a 2-run inside the park little league home run. He also had 2 doubles on top of that triple. So that's 7. Like, sometimes you look at FanDuel a little bit and you're like, man, what has to happen for a guy to have that many total bases in a game? Spencer Steer had 7 total bases in this game. Just went crazy. Had 3 RBIs and 2 runs scored. That was amazing to see, because he's been a guy that, you know, we talked about him being super consistent coming into the season. He hasn't been that consistent this year. He has had some pretty long stretches of not hitting great. And maybe it's a little bit of putting too much pressure on himself, seeing other guys struggle and feeling like he has to be the guy to carry the team, and he's just not doing it. But he seems to be hitting well when everyone else is hitting well. He's a really good, like, let's keep it going type of dude. He really was doing that in this game, especially, I mean, you had a great day from Elly Cruz, but his great day was made possible, at least in the first inning, because of that little league home run that Spencer Steer had. And then Rake Fraley followed that up. Rake Fraley finally returned. My goodness. It's been a long season for Jake. That was just his second home run. The homer that he hit in Atlanta was just his second home run. His first one he hit on April 15th. Been a huge drought. Over 3 months in between home runs for a dude that, quite honestly, was hitting cleanup a lot last year, and it was warranted. He was a good cleanup hitter for a little bit there. And he also added a pair of singles. He had a 3-hit day in this win. Fantastic to see. I really want to see the power come back for him, because that is something that is missing. Like, if you look at this lineup that scored a ton of runs last year, and I thought, at least on a bold prediction scale, could, you know, threaten the most runs scored ever by a modern era Reds team. One of the biggest reasons they're not even going to sniff that is because Jake Fraley has not had the power that he had last year. There's many other reasons for that, but that's one of them. If they can get that power back the rest of the season, that's going to go a long way to helping the consistency of this lineup. But that was great to see in a 3-hit day for him. And then on the pitching side of things, the bullpen. Let's talk about that for a minute, because it feels like here recently, especially in Washington, the bullpen was just awful. On Wednesday, they pitched 4 2/3 perfect innings. Not just shutout innings, perfect innings. No walks, no hits, no nothing. And they had 8 strikeouts. Sam Maul, Lucas Sims, Tony Santheon, and Justin Wilson. Lucas Sims and Justin Wilson needed those appearances like they needed oxygen, because it's been a struggle for them at times this season. Justin Wilson, especially here recently, has been rough. But how about Tony Santheon? 2 innings, 8 strikeouts. Again, like I said, 2 perfect innings, 8 strikeouts. Sorry, 4 strikeouts. I'm reading my notes wrong. Tony Santheon had 4 strikeouts in 2 innings. You could have 8 strikeouts in 2 innings, but that would be hard. But Tony Santheon looking good. Hopefully he sticks around in the majors for a little while and see if he can keep building on this. He's had a really good season in AAA. He had a really good spring training. Maybe he's turning it around as a relief pitcher, getting that nasty slider back. That would be huge. But that was so impressive, especially when you consider what we'll talk about with Frankie Montas here in a few minutes. And then you go back to Monday, which at this point feels like an eternity ago, but game 1, Will Benson had a multi-hit game. What? Some people, you tell that, they'd be like, nah, you're lying. Yeah, Will Benson, multi-hit game. And a homer. And then Jeimer Candelario, he had 2 singles and a couple of RBIs as well. And he was benefited by the fact that Elly De La Cruz was just running wild on the Braves on Monday. He would get on base, he'd steal. Or he'd get on base and he'd go first to third on a single from somebody else. It was so much fun to watch him. If you missed him on Monday, Elly De La Cruz was a huge, huge reason that the Reds won on Monday. But Jeimer Candelario got the benefit of hitting him in. He got 2 RBIs, knocking Elly De La Cruz in twice. And also on Monday, Fernando Cruz with a perfect inning. 1 strikeout. Get him back rolling. He's been bullpen roulette here recently. When you call Fernando Cruz, it's felt like he either gives up the lead or he strikes out the side. There's like no in between there. Hopefully he can get back to being more consistently good. But there was plenty of good performances. You look at these guys and you're just like, okay, a lot of these guys needed it. Will Benson needed it. Jeimer Candelario needed it. Spencer Steer needed it. Plenty of good performances to build on from them. We've got a bit more to cover in today's pod, as there were some troubling performances as well. I get it, the Reds won 2 games, but it wasn't all perfect. And some of those troubling performances have continued trends from games past. You've got to use Game Time to get down to the ballpark. I do it all the time, whether I'm in Cincinnati to go to a home game or if I'm following the Reds on the road. I did this down in Atlanta just this past week. In fact, got some great deals as well. Late game ticket idea, because Game Time makes it easier to get tickets the closer to first pitch you get, because as you get closer to first pitch, their price actually decreases. And when you see the price on their app, you see the all-in price. There's no hidden fees. There's no processing this or that or the other, delivery fees, whatever. When you see $15, you pay $15. I think there's like a little bit of tax in there, but honestly, it's not as much as other apps. Game Time makes it so easy. Plus, if you're on the road with the Reds, you can see your view from your seat, so you know you're getting a good view. Had a beautiful view in Monday's game. Game Time made it so easy to do that. Check out the Game Time app today. And first-time users can use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Again, download the Game Time app and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase, because they've got the last minute tickets at the lowest prices, guaranteed. You can catch every pitch of the Reds' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM. Just download the SXM app and search the word Reds. Also, bookmark CincinnatiRedsTalk.com. I'm writing over there. I got a long piece about some things that I'm going to talk about in our show later on today. Some concerns I have for the future. That's CincinnatiRedsTalk.com. All right, so we talked about the good, talked about some really good performances from these 2 wins for the Reds in Atlanta. It wasn't without some troubling performances. The Reds were not perfect. They were really, really good, and they needed to be on Wednesday because Frankie Montas was not really good. And it's now his second start in a row where he wasn't good Frankie. I don't know that we got bad Frankie, but we didn't get good Frankie. 4 1/3, he threw 101 pitches. That's 101 pitches, and he couldn't get more than 13 outs. It's not good. He had 10 hits allowed, and there was a lot of hard contact. I was driving back from Atlanta, and I was listening on the radio. There was a lot of loud contact, and I looked it up later. Baseball Savant said that the average exit velo against him in this game was 92 miles an hour. That's really close to being a hard hit ball every time he allowed a ball to be put in play. And it's weird because early on this season, we were talking about Frankie Montas and the fact that the biggest strength that he had is that he filled up the strike zone. It feels like now when he does that, he is just getting clobbered. I don't know if it's like a lack of spin, and it's something I'm going to have to look into a little bit more for his next start, but Is he just not getting the same zip on his pitches? Is he not getting the same spin on his pitches? I actually got the chance. I was driving home and got the chance to, have Austin Elmore from ESPN 1530. He co-hosts Cincy 360 with Tony Pike, noon to 3. But got the chance to have him tag along with us because he flew down. He was in the middle of all that fiasco with Delta and, computers and all that stuff. But we helped him avoid trying to go back through all of that. And so we were both listening to the game together and we're like, man, early on this season, that was his calling card. And now it can't be because when he does, he gets killed. And so he has to nibble. And then he ends up giving up walks. And then he ends up throwing more pitches. And then, okay, well, he's keeping it in the strike zone, but it's getting fouled off. Or different things that are really driving up his pitch count. And we wondered, is he tired? It's like, think about it. He got in for like 1 inning last year with the Yankees, coming back from that shoulder surgery. And I looked at a study that showed that this type of shoulder surgery, pitchers just don't have the same career after they get it. He's been really good at points this year, so I don't want to go too far with any sort of analysis with that, but it seems like these last 2 starts, he has been a much different pitcher, a much less effective pitcher, and not really the kind of guy that you want to trust every 5th day. Hopefully his next start will alleviate those concerns. Somebody else that I'm concerned about, I've been concerned about Alexis Diaz all year, man. And I get it. He got the last 3 outs of the win on Monday. But he allowed a run, and he allowed enough base runners that the tying run came to the plate. The Reds entered the 9th inning up 4-0. They end up winning 4-1, and they end up winning whenever Alexis Diaz gives up a fly ball to deep left field with 2 runners on. Like, I hate doing the whole thing. Well, if they were in a different ballpark, but if they were in Great American Ballpark, does that carry out and the game gets tied? I was sitting next to, obviously I'm down at the Braves park, but sitting next to a Braves fan that, he was telling me they still do the chop, and, if it's late in the game and if it's a night game or something like, or the game is at night, they'll like turn down the lights and everybody will hold out their phones and do the chop with the light on. And it looks really cool. And he's like, but they don't do it when the Braves are getting killed like they're getting killed tonight. And I thought in the back of my mind, I'm like, if Diaz comes in, they might. I hated being right about that. I hate being right about the fact that Diaz has been so untrustworthy this year. And it makes me think that going into next season, there should be a closer controversy. And quite frankly, if they move Graham Ashcraft to the bullpen, there will be. Because Graham Ashcraft could be a really good closer, I think. But, yeah, he has been, he's almost an automatic, comes into the ball game, walks a guy, gives up a hit, and then all of a sudden the game is in jeopardy. He's been anything but trustworthy this year. I really hope he figures it out, but he's only had like a handful of games this year where we're like, that is the Alexis Diaz we love and know from last year. And most of his games have been this new Alexis Diaz that gives me Eddie Guardado vibes. Not a good guy to have vibes about. And the other thing, the fielding, man. Like, look, we've complained about the Reds fielding so much this season, and I don't want to go too crazy on it. I said early on this year, I said that the Reds could out-hit bad fielding. And it's very clear that that was a bad take because there's been so many games where they haven't. Because their fielding has been atrocious this year on more than some occasions. I mean, let's call it what it is. FanDuel should have longer odds for the Reds to actually turn a double play than the odds on the Elly parlay should be. Like, the odds on the Elly parlay are usually like 4-1, plus 400, plus, or 5-1 sometimes, plus 500. The odds on the Reds turning a double play in any given ball game are getting to the point where they should be like 10-1. Because there were a lot. And by a lot, I mean like 3 or 4. Because you don't get that many during a game. But there were a lot of chances in Wednesday's ball game to turn some double plays. And they couldn't do it. Thinking specifically about the bottom of the first inning, where Frankie Montas is just throwing all the pitches. And after the Reds go up 4-0 in the blink of an eye, he comes in and gives up 1 run, still gives up some base runners. The Reds had back-to-back at-bats, where it was a ground ball to a ground ball to Elly, and then a ground ball to Noelvi Marte, looking like tailor-made double plays. They didn't turn double play on either ground ball, and they only got 1 out for those 2 ground balls. If you didn't see it, like the second ground ball, the ground ball to Noelvi Marte, he makes not a good throw to Elly, but a throw that Elly should have at least caught to get the first out. But you could tell that it was on Elly's mind. He's like, we don't turn a lot of double plays. Jeff is thinking it. Jeff's like, oh man, Elly's got to turn this double play, so I got to make sure and turn this double play. So he doesn't even catch that ball. It's been frustrating to watch this Reds fielding this year. Double plays are just part of it, man. I did look that up, by the way. The Reds aren't dead last. I would have thought they were dead last in double plays turned. They're not. They're third to last. They're down there with the Rockies. They've turned 1 more double play than the Rockies, and they've turned a lot more than the White Sox. The White Sox are really, really bad. They lost their 77th game yesterday. Ugh. They might flirt with the worst record ever. But yeah, like, I love the fact that the Reds went down to Atlanta and won the 2 games that they ended up playing. The second game of the doubleheader that was supposed to be at 6:30 on Wednesday, that got postponed due to rain. That's been pushed back to September 9th, I believe. I think it's like a Monday. So the Reds are going to actually have to make like a pit stop in Atlanta to finish that series and then keep up on a road trip that they're already on. I think they go to St. Louis right after that. But they had some good performances. But they also still had some troubling performances that I can't look at this team and say, boy, they're figuring it out. Because the same things plague them. And sometimes they just score more than enough runs. And sometimes they don't. And when they don't, they get swept by the Nationals. That'll wrap it up for this edition of the Locked On Reds podcast. Thank you, as always, for making us your first listen every single day. Every day is coming up on the next Locked On Reds podcast that's going to be actually coming up later today, prime time today. Nick Kral's challenge is clear, and the clock has been ticking. It's not just started to tick this deadline. It's been ticking. I'll tell you what that is on the next Locked On Reds podcast. But until then, remember that we will be Locked On Reds every single day.